Hello there. Welcome to another Tiny Desk sermon. We are going to be looking at the readings for the fourth Sunday in Advent, and we're going to focus on the Gospel reading. Fourth Sunday in Advent is when Advent sort of finally is anticipating Christmas or the birth of Jesus. Everything up to now in the traditional 4 Sundays of Advent has been about the future coming of Christ or the sort of preparation for Christ coming into our lives now. Now we actually connect to the familiar Christmas story. So let me point out a couple things about the lectionary before we dive into the gospel reading. The first reading from Micah is the reading that talks about a new anointed one, a new king, a new Messiah coming out of Bethlehem, one of the little clans. This is in keeping with the tradition that David came from Bethlehem, so the new king will be like David, the good king. And so Bethlehem is the place to come from. So this is very influential in the Christian tradition. And then we get, for the psalm, there are two choices actually, but the psalm we will be using is actually from Luke. And it is the text known as the Magnificat, which is what Mary sings following her encounter with Elizabeth, which is the text we're going to hear today. So we're going to chant this before the gospel reading, but it's really the text that comes at the end of the gospel reading, which we will not repeat then. All right, so let's take a look at the gospel reading from Luke. Luke 1, 39 to 45, and then the optional verses are the Magnificat. Keep in mind that just prior to this, Mary had a visit from the angel Gabriel. And it tells us that when that visit happened, it says, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to Mary. What 6th month? Well, we just heard about Elizabeth finding out in her old age that she was going to have a child, and that would be John. So the 6th month is Elizabeth's 6th month of pregnancy, and that's important for detail later on. In those days, Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leaped in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." And then we get Mary's response, which is the Magnificat. All right, so a few interesting things going on here, and then some things that come up just after this I want to mention. So Mary is in Nazareth, and travels to a Judean town in the hill country, probably about 80 miles. Why does she go to her relative's house, Elizabeth? Her relative Elizabeth's house. Well, Mary has just found out that she's pregnant, and Mary is betrothed but not married. And it seems to me there are numerous ways you could describe why they get together, but the most obvious one is at least part of the answer, which is Mary is a young woman who is pregnant. And very often when those kind of things happen, young women would go stay with an aunt or a relative during their pregnancy so as to escape any issues of shame. And we've already heard Mary's encounter with Gabriel, and she says, well, how can this be since I am a virgin? And by the way, we don't even know anything about Joseph yet. So there are other reasons, and I want to talk about them, why these two would be spending time together. But I think that's the one that has to be named. So Mary's newly pregnant, and Elizabeth is 6 months pregnant. And so when Mary gets there, there's this sort of spirit-inspired encounter where not only Elizabeth, but John the Baptist, whom Elizabeth is 6 months pregnant with, respond with joy, a leaping joy, to the arrival of Mary, because she will give birth to Jesus. So it's a very unusual story. It's very filled with a lot of assumptions about how God works and how the Holy Spirit works. The Holy Spirit, by the way, is an incredibly important part of Luke's gospel. And here we see the Spirit is in play. So, why does Elizabeth say, and blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord? Why does she pronounce this blessing on Mary? And the perhaps immediate answer to that is to think, well, because Mary is pregnant with Jesus. But to only focus on that is to kind of risk this text speaking only in a traditional way about how women's roles were understood, that women were mostly valued for their ability to reproduce, and so forth. But we already know there's more going on than that in this story, because we heard Mary in the encounter with Gabriel, and Mary, in an act of great trust, says, yes, I'll go along with God's plan. That is really what Elizabeth, I think, is responding to in the text, and why it says, and blessed is she who believed that it will be a fulfillment. So Mary is not simply praised because she is a vessel for birthing Jesus. She is praised as a woman of faith who responds to what God is doing with trust. And so that's why Mary becomes such a model of faith for all people, certainly not just for women. So we have to separate out the pregnancy side of things with the faith side of things, even though they're very closely connected in Mary's life. So I think that's important. And then it says after all this, and we don't hear this text at this point, but in verse 56, after the Magnificat, and Mary remained with her, with Elizabeth, about 3 months, and then returned to her home. So we already know it's the 6th month. Mary remained about 3 months. So what does that tell you? I think it obviously says that that Mary stayed until Elizabeth gave birth, the 9th month. And I think this is a really important part of the text and this whole story. To me, this whole story, as I've subtitled my Tiny Desk sermon today, is about lean on me. It's about how people are drawn together by God's activity into community, into family, into relationships, and are called to lean on each other, to support each other, particularly in need, or particularly in how people of faith are responding to what God is doing and trying to be faithful and living it out. So, I envision two things happening at the same time. One, that Elizabeth is providing a place for Mary to come and stay while they sort out the implications of a young betrothed woman being pregnant. And two, that Mary is there to assist Elizabeth in the birth of John. And so the two come together and say, this is a wonderful story of people supporting each other, of people leaning on each other, that Mary and Elizabeth are depending on each other to get through this important moment in their lives. It's not, it's not really a crisis, but having never been pregnant and given birth, I'm not going to say what that experience is like, but they need each other. And so what great models they are for us in thinking about living out our faith as we seek to trust what God is doing, and we seek to go through the maybe the struggles of trying to live out our faith. But we come together in the church like Elizabeth's home to mutually care for one another, to lean on each other. I think that's an important aspect of this text for us to ponder, men and women, people of all genders, how we're drawn into relationship to support each other. And then maybe the larger theological issue here is what God is doing, both through these two women and through the whole of Israel's story and through all of humanity. What God is doing draws people together. It brings people together out of their need and out of their faith for this work of supporting each other and for caring for the world. So I think this is a beautiful part of this text to ponder. And that sort of just doesn't pay much attention right now to the Magnificat, which is Mary's response to Elizabeth's blessing. And the curious thing about the Magnificat, which again we will be using as the psalm on Sunday, is that there's no mention of Mary being pregnant, of her preparing to give birth to Jesus, who would be the promised one. It just says that Mary's magnifying God and rejoicing in God because God has looked with favor on her, a lowly servant. And that in what God is doing, there's this radical transformation of the whole ordering of human society. Lowly are lifted up, proud are brought down, rich sent away hungry, empty, hungry, fed with good things. This is her response to what is happening. And it's one of the great New Testament scriptures and one of the most radical texts to ponder that kind of sets the stage for all of Luke's gospel. But I'm not really paying attention to that in my interpretation of the text because I like just focusing on right now this coming together of these two and why does it happen? Happens for a lot of reasons. And I might add that it seems to me that historically and even today, that this leaning on each other is something that women tend to do better than many men do. I'm not trying to be simplistic about the difference, but it seems to me there's this way that women are often drawn into caring for each other that men often don't know how to do, don't trust or resist for all the different reasons of masculinity and assumptions and all that we could explore another time. So, great stuff. So that's my take on the text. I see Trish is out there, and you said, I really like that, Trish. That makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure when that comment came in, if that was a response to why Mary went to Elizabeth's or why she stayed for 3 months. I'd love to hear what you were responding to there. Sorry, I missed it. So while I see if I get a response, I'll just say that so we have worship this Sunday at 10 a.m., live stream and in person, Advent 4. And then we have Christmas Eve worship, of course, on the 24th. And we're doing just one service at 9 p.m. We're going to have a lot of great music, sing a lot of the great songs we love to sing at Christmas, and enjoy the beautiful gathering and candlelight and for communion. So I hope you can join us for that. And then Sunday the 26th is the first Sunday after Christmas, and we do that as a lessons and carols service. There'll be a series of readings and related songs for that. And then we go from there. See, Trish shows that the important thing that Mary is doing is honoring God rather than having a baby. Okay, good. I'm glad you caught that. I think that that is really important here, and we not play into trusting in God, right? Not play into simply maybe female stereotypes about what makes women's lives important. Not to minimize or dismiss the childbearing side of the story, but it's really about Mary's response of faith and trust that was essential to the whole story happening. So I like to emphasize that. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope to see you sometime soon. I will do Tiny Desk Sermon next Wednesday, but then I will take the Wednesday after off because I'm going to be on Christmas vacation and I'll be traveling. Okay. Thanks you again for joining me. Peace.